right, so we're in this book. It's called Ancient America and Notes on American Archeology by John D. Baldwin, author of Prehistoric Nations. This is from 1872. We're on page 159. It says here, the oldest of civilizations. Some investigators who have given much study to the antiquities, traditions, old books, and probable geological history of Mexico and Central America. All right, so very important. Those who have investigated, those people who have given much study, those who actually do research of the antiquities and the actual traditions and actually research in these old books and probable geological history of Mexico and Central America believe that the first civilization the world ever saw appeared in this part of ancient America. All right, the first civilization of the world. They're not just talking about the Americas, they're talking about the very first civilization. Those investigators who have actually taken the time to study, given much study to these people, to this part of the world, believe and know that this is where the first civilization first ever appeared. Right, in this part of ancient America, says, or was immediately connected with it. They hold that the human race first rose to civilized life in America. All right, first civilized life in America. That's the cradle of all in America. Okay, in ancient America, which is geologically the oldest of the continents. All right, remember, geologically meaning the land is the oldest out of the primordial waters. It's the oldest. They found it. The most renowned geologist, Luis Agassiz, told us. The Mayas, isn't their story? They tell us they came out of the bottom of the sea, their land, Mayak. And it's proven geologically. There's a part in Canada, one of the oldest parts in the world that came out of the water. That's what they're saying according to their science. And that ages ago, the portion of this continent on which the first civilizers appeared was sunk beneath the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. All right, so they're saying something happened. Usually the engulfing of this portion of the land is supposed to have been affected by some tremendous convulsion of nature, and there is appeal to recollections of such a catastrophe, said to have been preserved in the old books of Central America. And it is. We've talked over this. And also in those of Egypt, from which Solon received an account of the lost Atlantis. Now, according to this hypothesis, the American continent formerly extended from Mexico, Central America, and New Granada far into the Atlantic Ocean, toward Europe and Africa, covering all the space now occupied by the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and the West India Islands. So they're saying that America extended that far. You hear what they're telling you, right? So it was still part of America. And going far beyond them toward the east and northeast. This lost portion, all right? This lost portion of America, remember, it's just an extension of America. This lost portion of the continent was the Atlantis, of which the old annals of Egypt told so much in the time of Solon. They're letting you know this is the actual place they were calling Atlantis. It was just an extension, a lost portion of America. These are the same stories of the old annals of Egypt that Plato told us. And it was the original seat of the first human civilization, the original seat. Just like the Egyptians said that the ancestors, their ancient ancestors, were from a western distant land where the first the people of the earth came about, which after the great cataclysm was renewed and perpetuated in the region where we now trace the mysterious remains of ancient cities. Those desiring to know what can be said in support of this view of ancient America must read the later volumes of Brasseur de Bourbourg, especially his Quatre Lettres sur le Mexique and his Sources de la Historia Primitive du Mexique. So we're going to get this book, we're going to get the full translation, even if we have to translate it from French. I got the actual books. These are in the archives, and we're able to be able to see these books. Continuing on page 184, it says here, it was an original civilization. It has been said, very justly by one explorer of the Mexican and Central American ruins, that the American monuments are different from those of any other known people of a new order, and entirely and absolutely anonymous. They stand alone. The more we study them, the more we find it necessary to believe that the civilization they represent was originated in America, and probably in the region where they are found. It did not come from the old world. They didn't come from that side of the world, that hemisphere. It was the work of some remarkably gifted branch of the race found on the southern part of this continent when it was discovered in 1492. Undoubtedly, it was very old. It was very old. They're talking about the civilizations of America. Its original beginning may have been as old as Egypt. It may have been as old as Egypt, or even farther back in the past, or even before Egypt. Then the ages to which Atlantis must be referred. And it may have been later than the beginning of Egypt. All right? Who can certainly tell its age? Who's going to tell the age? They don't know. Whether earlier or later, it was original. Whether later, oh, well, we'll discuss that later. No, we're going to discuss that now. It's earlier, and it is original. Its construction seems to have been a refined and artistic development of a style of building different from that of any other people, which began with ruder forms, but in all periods of its history preserved the same general conception. They show us the idea of the mound builders wrought out in stone and embellished by art. The decorations and the writings also are wholly original. There is no imitation of the work of any people ever known in Asia, Africa, or Europe. It appears evident that the method of building seen in the great ruins began with the ruder forms of mound work and became what we find it by gradual development as the advancing civilization supplied new ideas and gave higher skill, but the culture and the work were wholly original, wholly American. All right, so he's giving a hint that it seems that it started out all with first creating the mounds, right? Creating mounds, and then these mounds became stone buildings. In this book now is called Popular Account of the Ancient Egyptian by Sir J. Gardner Wilkinson. This is volume 1. Then it says here, throughout the upper and lower country, wine was the favorite beverage of the wealthy. They had also very excellent beer called citrus beer. I remember you can make beer from corn, which Diodorus, though wholly unaccustomed to it, and a native of a wine country, affirms was scarcely inferior to the juice of the grape. He didn't like beer. Strabo and other ancient authors have likewise mentioned it under the name of citrus, and though Herodotus pretends that it was merely used as a substitute for wine in the lowlands where corn was principally cultivated, so they're letting you know straight up that this beer was made where corn was being grown. So they were making it out of corn, chicha. Corn was principally cultivated. It is more reasonable to conclude it was drunk by the peasants in all parts of Egypt, though less in those districts where vines were abundant. Corn, beer. On page 168, continuing, it says the fertility of the soil. Fertility of the soil. Remember, fertile soil. Black fertile soil. That's what Kemet means. Fertile soil, not a landmass in Africa. It says, however, soon afforded a more valuable produce to the inhabitants, and long before they had made any great advances in civilization, before they had any civilization, look what they're going to tell you, before Egypt was made, before anybody can create any civilization, corn and leguminous plants were grown to a great extent throughout the country. Corn before any great advances. Corn. How specific is this? Corn. Page 173, it says here, in Lower Egypt, or as Herodotus styles it, the corn country. The corn country, corn. They were in the habit of drying and salting birds of various kinds, as quails, ducks, and others. All right, if you saw my corn videos, you know, we showed that there was a part exactly where they were saying in the Mississippi that they were getting quails and all these birds, ducks, and all that. It's just like the ancient Egyptians were doing it. It was abundant, just like they say the Nile was abundant with these animals back in the ancient times, and it isn't even now, but it was more back then supposedly. All right, so again, the corn country, Lower Egypt, the corn country, and fish were prepared by them in the same manner, both in Upper and Lower Egypt. We're on page 200. Now, this is very interesting because, I did those videos on the ancient sports of America and how we invented and created balls. So it says here the balls were made of leather or skin. Really? Where did they get the idea of making balls out of leather? Sewed with string crosswise in the same manner as our own and stuffed with bran or husk of corn. Stuffed with corn, husk of corn. That's very specific. Husk of corn, and those which have been found at Thebes are about 3 inches in diameter. Are in Thebes, in Palenque, and Mesoamerica. What you talking about? Husk of corn? This is page 231. And it says here, horses and asses were abundant, and the latter were employed as beasts of burden. Horses were abundant. Again, you just saw my recent horses origin video here in America. Horses are from America. They were already here when the Europeans got here. They lied to us about that. Again, horses were abundant. They're saying here, I wonder what they're talking about. Horses were abundant, and the latter were employed as beasts of burden for treating out corn. For treating out corn, you needed an animal, right? You don't do that when you spread wheat. Wheat is just spread with the hand. But when you want to plant corn and all that, you need an animal, one of those things to dig the dirt and get it out good. You needed animals to do that. So they are talking about corn, and this is supposed to be in ancient Egypt, right? Whereas they're talking about Tameri, Baraka, for treating out corn, particularly in Lower Egypt, and for many other purposes.
And it says, men cutting corn with sickles. Detail of a wall painting in the tomb of Menas, scribe of the fields and estate inspector under Pharaoh Thutmose IV, 18th dynasty, 1614 BC, it says, in the cemetery of Sheikh Abd al-Qurna. Photographed by Eric Lesson. Labors of the field, clearing wood, plowing, etc. So as you can see, it first said cutting down corn with sickles. All right. As well as you can see the plowing, it's for grains that need to be planted deeply, not like the wheat grains, as we'll read about later. That's a different way of planting. So it says here, harvesting corn rows versus dense stands of wheat. Peruvians planted maize in widely separated rows that allowed sufficient space for a llama with baskets to walk between the corn stalks during the harvest. Likewise, Babylonian corn rows, above right it says, but it's actually in the bottom left, provided sufficient room for mounted soldiers to ride his horse between rows. A dense stand of wheat in Egypt, below left, rose only to the level of workers' shoulders, so wheat is a little shorter than corn. And the Egyptians clearly showed the difference. They showed wheat when they painted it, or they put in the hieroglyphs a little shorter, and then they showed the corn a little taller, right? With the corns right on the top corn, like we have in many parts of America as well still. And in Babylon, the depictions of the corn there as well. So continuing, corn plants in Egypt, bottom center, were higher than a worker's head, as seen in this illustration from a papyrus book of the dead in the Berlin Egyptian Museum. We see a similar scene in Oaxaca, Mexico, where a farmer reaches for a corn cob. Right, so corn is depicted a lot taller than wheat in all these hieroglyphics, right, in Babylon and Egypt. Right, you gotta notice the difference. So you see what's been going on, right? When we look at these pictures and drawings, you can see here in Babylon and Egypt, you see what they're doing, right? They're planting corn. They're planting grains that need to be put into the soil deeply. This is not for wheat, barley, or any of the other grains they're saying that they're using for bread, right? This is corn they're using. Look at it. You got to use your senses. It's been in front of us this whole time. It's always been there. This is how you plant corn. And this is how you would plant, in most cases, wheat, barley, and all the other grains. You can just scatter it. You don't need these big ogs helping you make these deep ditches to plant the soil, the grain, deep, 2 inches under the soil, like you would need to with corn. All right, so get this in your head so you can see. When you start seeing these hieroglyphs, these drawings, these pictures, it's clearly showing you you're planting corn. There says a million of facts of correct data and elementary constants in the entire circle of the sciences and on all subjects of speculation and practice by Sir Richard Phillips. It says published by Darton and Clark, 58 Holborn Hill, and to be had of all booksellers, 1840, London. All right, so let's get into this. It says here, Osiris was Dagon, son of Uranus and G, and brother of Cronus. So we're correlating with what we read earlier, right, with Dagon. He invented the plow and first cultivated bread corn. All right, just like the Egyptians lived off of bread, right? We've already proved matzah is corn. So correlating here, it says that he was the first one to cultivate, bread corn, for which he was called Sus Arostrius. All right, so he's also Sus, or in Phoenician, Asti Orotius, Asi Eretz, or Asareth. That sounds like Asareth in America. Asi Ereth, right? The lost tribes went, and Esdras, or Osiris in Egypt. He was killed by Typhoon, his nephew, one of the sons of Cronus, after a reign of 35 years, and buried at Philo. His hieroglyphic was a plow and other implements of agriculture, and plows are for large grain seeds like corn and maize, not for scattered or broadcast style seeds that you can just spread with your hands. Let's go. Continuing, says Isis was either the daughter of Cronus or the concubine of Uranus, whom Dagon married, and the Greeks Ceres, her husband being the inventor of corn plows. And so corn was first cultivated in Egypt by Isis, or the Ceres of the Greeks. Now, once again, just to remind you, they tell us corn was brought over to the old world by Columbus. So there's not supposed to be any corn in any of these people's mythology, or religion, or stories. All right, but once you orientate yourself again with the foundational truth, you know that the old world was on this side, and they're always talking about corn because that's what helped them settle down, right? That was very important to them. It was genetically modified and engineered. And, we have a lot of legends that the gods gave it to the people. So you see it also in the old world was, highly mentioned in their also religious writings as well. So let's continue.
It's called Popular Account of the Ancient Egyptian by Sir J. Gardner Wilkinson. This is volume 1. To continue, we're on page 319 of this book. It says here, the priests enjoyed great privileges. They were exempt from taxes. They consumed no part of their own income in any of their necessary expenses, and they had one of the 3 portions into which the land of Egypt was divided, free for all duties. From all duties, they were provided for from the public stores, out of which they were received a stated allowance of corn. They were given corn and all other necessaries of life. And we find that when Pharaoh, by the advice of Joseph, all right, listen, Pharaoh by the advice of Joseph, what are we talking about here? Joseph? Remember Joseph, who Joseph is? All right, one of the sons of Jacob. Joseph, the youngest son, Joseph. Right, he ended up in Egypt. He became very important in Egypt. And what did Joseph do? Had a dream and told him, yo, you should save corn, because you're gonna have 7 years of prosperity and abundance. Then you're gonna have 7 years of famine. So Joseph helped the Pharaoh stack up corn in the granaries, and it was corn. We talk about ancient Tameri, America, corn, where corn grows. This is corn they're talking about, literally. It's not talking about grain or wheat. No, any grain. We're talking about literally corn. As I said before, that's what, before they were advanced and civilized, they were already growing corn. So again, by the advice of Joseph, took all the land of the Egyptians in lieu of corn. The priests were not obliged to make the same sacrifice of their landed property, nor was the tax of the 5th part of the produce entailed upon it as on that of other people. So they're letting you know a little bit of the luxury of how the priests lived in ancient Egypt.
So continuing, it says here from this book, Ancient Egyptian Myths and Legends by Lewis Spence. It says here, the character of Osiris as a deity of vegetation is brought out by the legend that he was the first to teach men the use of corn. and by the custom of beginning his annual festival with the tillage of the ground. He is said also to have introduced the cultivation of the vine. In one of the chambers dedicated to Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae, the dead body of Osiris is represented with stalks of corn sprinkling from it, and a priest is depicted watering the stalks from a pitcher, which he holds in his hand, as you can see. The accompanying legend sets forth that this is the form of him whom one may not name, Osiris of the mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. It's like a resurrection. It would seem impossible to devise a more graphic way of depicting Osiris as a personification of the corn, while the inscription attached to the picture proves that this personification was the kernel of the mysteries of the god, the innermost secret that was only revealed to the initiated. All right, you hear this? In estimating the mythical character of Osiris, very great weight must be given to this monument. The story that his mangled remains were scattered up and down the land may be a mythical way of expressing either the sowing or the winnowing of the grain. The latter interpretation is supported by the tale that Isis placed the several limbs of Osiris on a corn sieve, or the legend may be a reminiscence of the custom of slaying a human victim as a representative of the corn spirit, and distributing this flesh or scattering his ashes over the fields to fertilize them. All right, so we continue to correlate. It says here the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom maize cobs, 2500 BC to 1781 BC, according to this research, right? I believe in Mr. Connor Thompson. It says a mural from Amenemhet's tomb at 2000 BC. Above it says, presently in the Cairo Museum, the food display on the right includes a typical maize cob, painted yellow with green husk leaves. Pharaohs and wealthy ate immature sweet corn as a fruit, all right? Field corn that was fed to the masses was not portrayed in royal mortuary art because it was regarded as unclean, right? So the other corn, right, was fed to the other masses or the slaves, right? Just like the matzah, all right? It says a new kind of sweet corn, the corn of Osiris, says here, became popular during the New Kingdom as a magical food of immortality. It came from the Western Duat, or paradise. And, we've been correlating what America is, right? The ancient land, the Hebrews, the Old Testament, right? So the promised land or paradise. As it says, the corn came from here. It came from the Western Duat, or paradise. Let's continue. It says here, on ceremonial occasions, celebrating the resurrection of Osiris, god of the dead, there was a special kind of corn that was served to royalty and to priestly participants. An earthen effigy of the god was impregnated with corn seed, and it was then watered for several months until immature cobs appeared at the very tops of the stalks. So again, at the top, right, like the other god we just saw holding the stalks, and it shows the corn right on the top. These cobs are almost spear-shaped, right? They certainly look nothing like immature wheat plants. Probably the immature plants were eating as a fruit, because at this stage of arrested development, they would have been very sweet and succulent, just like sweet corn, right? You can eat it raw, actually, before it gets hard, like fresh. It's better. This delicacy is probable the food that had been referred to in Egyptian texts as the corn of Osiris. So every time they're talking about corn of Osiris, they're really talking about sweet corn, right? Because it was new to the other parts of the old world, because that's coming from America, right? Or from certain tribes. It says here, in ancient Egyptian religion, Neper, alters Nepra or Nepri, was a god of grain. His female counterpart was Nepit, the goddess of grain. So even this god had a counterpart, a female counterpart, and there was a male counterpart, right? Just like we read earlier, okay? Same thing. Continuing, regarding Neper, it says here, in myth, pictured in human form, Nepri is often depicted as a child suckled by Renenutet, right? Nepri's body was dotted to represent grains of corn. The hieroglyphics that write his name similarly include the symbols of grain. Naturally, as Lord of the Mouth, Neper's mother was identified as Renenutet, who gave out the Ren, a person's true name, and who was also identified as source of nourishment. So I just want to point out here, as you can see, Renenutet is the one on the left and in the middle, and on the one on the right is Isis, right? We know Isis is the goddess of corn as well, right? And just to point out, we can see how this evolved in some time as what we call today the Virgin Mary, right? Just like we mentioned earlier, right, about the goddess mother and these stories of the feminine energy of nourishment, right? As you can see where it comes from. So again, it says here, corn mother is also known as corn woman, corn maiden, and yellow woman. A variety of versions of this goddess shows up in a variety of cultures around the world, including Europe, Egypt, we just read, India, and the Americas. Some of the more well-known goddesses are said to be corn mothers, including the Celtic Ceridwen, the Egyptian Isis, and the Greek Demeter or Ceres, right? Or Roman, I believe. All right, so as you can see, there's a foundational truth behind this, and it's all leading to America. So continuing about Neper, it says here, once the myth of Osiris and Isis had begun to be told, since Osiris was now a life-death rebirth deity, in common with many cultures, right? Again, many cultures. His story was associated with the annual harvest and the annual disappearance of any visible life in the crop. Thus, at this point, Neper became considered merely an aspect of Osiris, a much more significant god, gaining the title one who lives after dying. All right, so it's the same person or same epithet. It's just another epithet, as they say, of Osiris. So again, in conclusion, the figure of Neper is dotted with grains of corn, all right, corn. And the Nile gods are shown as fat figures with hanging pouch and breast. The same being true of some of the accompanying divinities, an alternation being intended of male and female.
It's called Popular Account of the Ancient Egyptian by Sir J. Gardner Wilkinson. This is volume 1. On page 302, it says here, chapter 5, Origin of the Egyptians. Just want to emphasize that mainstream will tell you, most scholars, there's a general consensus. Most of these Egyptologists, people who study ancient Egypt, if you read about what they thought about the origins of Egypt, they'll tell you that they're not from Africa. They didn't originate in Africa, so they're not even African. And they're more likely Asiatic, out of a Caucasian race. Caucasian. And when we say Caucasian, this doesn't necessarily mean white people. The original Caucasians were people of dark complexion. It says here, the origin of the Egyptians is an envelope in the same obscurity as that of most people. All right, so they don't really know, because remember, we're talking about Tameri. But they were undoubtedly from Asia, undoubtedly. So what part of Asia? What part of Asia, really? Because there's maps that show California all the way connected to Asia, and Asia being much more land connected to America in these old maps. So we know Marco Polo, future video, Marco Polo, when he went to the Far East, when we talk about the farthest east, the far east, we know we were talking about this ancient land that the Greeks called Atlantis. We know it was Amaruka. We know he went to go see the Khan, his great kingdoms over there, as Marco Polo described. But they were undoubtedly from Asia, as is proved by the form of the skull, which is that of a Caucasian race, by their features, hair, and other evidences. And the whole valley of the Nile throughout Ethiopia, all Abyssinia, and the coast to the south were peopled by Asiatic immigrations. They're not even Africans, nor are the Kafirs of a Negro race. Pliny is therefore right in saying that these people on the banks of the Nile, south of Syene, were Arabs or Semitic race, who also founded Heliopolis. We're in this book now. It's called The Ancient Monuments of North and South America, second edition by C.S. Rufinski, AM, PhD, Professor of Historical Natural Sciences, member of many learned societies in Philadelphia, New York, Lexington, Cincinnati, Nashville, Paris, Bordeaux, Brussels, Bonn, Vienna, Zurich, Naples, and the American Antiquarian Society, the Northern Antiquarian Society of Copenhagen. The Mexican antiquities have lately been illustrated in many splendid works by Anglio, Kingsborough, Dupax, Baradan, St. Priest, Nebel, Icaza, Gondra, Waldeck. In an clever review of these works in the Foreign Review, it is distinctly asserted that the Toltecans, the people of Tul, or Tol, right? People of Tol, or American Atlantes, the American Atlanteans, what? Were a quite different people from the later Mexican tribes, that their monuments are equal in interest to those of Egypt and Syria, equal in interest to those of Egypt, with colossal and even cyclopean structures, which agree with my former statements, and I have traced them in America from Missouri to Chile, but their central seats and empires were from Mexico to Quito. Their great temple of Otolum near Palenque was equal to Solomon's temple. Their mythology was quite peculiar and Asiatic. Their man deity was Hun Aku, first cause, comparable to Anuki, the Syrian Cybele. Their astronomy was antediluvian, the year of 360 days of 18 months of 20 days. We're in this book real quick. It says Views of Ancient Monuments in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan by F. Catherwood Arch. It says here the Mexican temples were called teocalli. They're talking about the pyramids, the teocallis, or houses of God. Remember that Memphis, Egypt, Aegyptus means house of Pita or house of Ta or temple of Ta, right? House of God. Same thing. And the Mexican temples were called teocallis, houses of God, and were very numerous. There were several hundreds in each of the principal cities, several hundreds, many of them doubtless very humble edifices. They were solid masses of earth, brick, or stone, and in their forms somewhat resembled the pyramidal structures of ancient Egypt. The bases of many of them were several hundred feet square, and they towered to a height of more than 100 feet. They had staircases leading from the base to the summit, on which stood the temple with altars on which fires were kept as indistinguishable as those in the temple of Vesta. There were said to be 600 of these altars on smaller buildings within the enclosure of the great temple of Mexico, with those on the sacred edifices in other parts of the city shed a brilliant illumination over its streets through the darkest night. And we continue, says here, at Ocosingo. Ocosingo is actually an archaeological site. It's a pyramid, Ocosingo pyramid. I'm gonna show you how complex, how big it is, how massive this construction is. It says at Ocosingo, we met with the arch before alluded to, with the usual accompaniments of mounds and terraces, and an ornament over one of the doorways, not unlike the winged globe of Egypt. Just like the wind globe of Egypt in the archway, the same symbol found in Ocosingo. All right, so first of all, what is the wind globe of Egypt, right? The globe and the wind, right? We see that in the doorways and a lot of these so-called temples or pyramids, right, in Egypt, right? The globe and the wings. Now, Ocosingo, right? Ocosingo. Let me show you how complex this is, all right? Hold up, all right? This is Ocosingo right here. Ocosingo, this whole thing is one structure, one big pyramid. Let me show you. Right, Ocosingo. It's very big. Ocosingo. That's probably one of their ball courts and ceremonial places. Yeah, Ocosingo is huge. I'm gonna get like a diagram for you guys. All right, that here's another one. Ocosingo is huge. It's one big complex. So he's saying they found a globe, a winged globe in one of the archways, just like in ancient Egypt, in this site right here that we never heard of. how big it is. Look at that. That's one big monument right here, all the way from the bottom. Probably, I think actually from this over here, all of it stone, brick, all the way to the top. It doesn't start right here. This whole thing is together. That's just one complex. Aside from it, up in front of it is other uh, buildings. All right, here's a good one. It says picture of Tonina Mayan ruins and archaeological site right here. Single pyramid. You see the whole thing. This whole thing, even in the bottom, it's all brick. It's all stone, masonry, all the way to the top. It's very complex. Right, Ocosingo. Very complex. See from the top, probably you can see all that. Look at this place, beautiful, right? Mocosingo, where they found a winged globe, an Egyptian winged globe. So here's some of the what's found on the walls, some of the art. Yeah, you know, it's pretty big, it's pretty massive, you know. Doesn't compare to things in Africa. There's some of the parts and you know, some of the parts, and look at all these different rooms and stuff. Another view of it right here. It's massive. Right, we're in this book now. It's called Myths and Symbols, or Aboriginal Religions in America by Stephen D. Peat, PhD. It's part of Prehistoric America, Volume 5, actually. It says Stephen is a member of the American Antiquarian Society, New England Historical and Genealogical Society, correspondent member of the American Oriental Society, Numismatic Society, New York, Victoria Institute, Society of Biblical Archaeology, also editor of American Antiquarian and Oriental Journal. This is from 1905. The most remarkable fact which is brought out by this study is that the Aboriginal religions of America correspond to the earliest forms of religions which prevailed in the lands of the East. All right? It's the same thing. It's just like the old world. But the grades of progress which are manifest and then follow the geographical instead of chronological lines. The lowest forms, such as demonism, found in the far north among the Eskimos, resemble that which was the earliest in the Far East. So only demonism, you see this, like demonism was more like towards the Eskimos, more really, not anybody else. Next to this was the totemism, which resembled that which prevailed among the wild and wandering tribes of Arabia. There was also a system of star worship and sky worship, which prevailed among the mountain tribes of the interior, which resembled that existed in Central Asia during the prehistoric times. The system of sun worship, which prevailed among the agricultural tribes of the Gulf states, closely resembled in that which existed in Egypt. Very closely resembled exactly, you know, how it was in Egypt and Babylonia at the opening of history. And many of the same customs were observed. Many of the same customs were observed. All right, in ancient America and in just like in Babylon and Egypt. Really. They continue on page 125 of this book. It says here animal worship and sun worship. All right, so that's how they interpret, Tosh the hijack. So they're going to be talking about this stele, this image right here, this glyph. This is actually a priest. They're calling him a priest. Now they're going to be talking about, now they're going to say a tiger skin, right? We know that in America, this is a jaguar. This is a jaguar skin. We're going to talk about that. Something significant about that. Right, so take a good look at him, you see? Smoking it up or even speaking, who knows? But we're going to keep going. It says here, the picture is suggestive. It is not certain whether the form represents the god Tlaloc or his priest. For priests were frequently clothed with the same kind of garments on their person and had in their faces the same symbols that the god himself did. It will be noticed that the figure has a tiger skin resting upon his shoulders. It's not a tiger skin, it's a jaguar. This was in Egypt, the official dress of the priests of the sun. Same thing in Egypt. This is how the Egyptian priests dress. With the jaguar, bro, like where they were released ancient America. That's an American thing. So in Egypt they did the same thing. Egypt, the priests, and the fashion seems to have prevailed in America. It seems to have prevailed in America just like in Egypt, right? We're on page 132 of this book, and it's going to correlate with something we just read, all right? This is a different source, all right? It says the winged globe, all right? The winged globe is another symbol which shows a system of progression. The wind globe in Egypt was a symbol of the sun. The wind globe is found in America. The wind globe is also found in America. In Tameri, the wind globe. Remember, they found the wind globe in Ocosingo, that pyramid structure I just showed you. In Egypt, the winged orb was a symbol of the kingly office and was frequently placed over the head of the king. The winged orb is a modification of the disc. The overshadowing wings are found in Egypt and Assyria and India and in America. In all these countries, there is a circle or a globe with wings issuing from it, and generally some animal head is connected with the circle. In Egypt, the asp issues from the circle. In Assyria, the head of an eagle is seen above the circle and the tail. In America, the head and wings of a eagle are sometimes seen hovering over the circles, as we have described above. On page 137, he says here, there's another symbol in America which is quite important because of its resemblance to those common in Egypt and Babylonia, and especially because of its connection with sun worship. We refer to the animal-headed throne, 3 specimens of which have been found in Central America, 1 at Chichen and 2 at Palenque. We're on page 161 of this book, and right here has a great drawing or picture or drawing of the pyramid of Cholula, very old one. All right, you see how it looks like a mountain, but that's actual pyramid, one of the biggest in the world. All right, gonna get the video right now to show you, but that says here, the size of the pyramid is to be considered. A comparison has been drawn between the pyramids of America and of Egypt. It has been said that the pyramid of Cahokia and of Cholula are fully equal to those of Giza. The Cahokia, both of those are bigger than Giza. All right, they're bigger. And of Mycerinus. We must, however, distinguish between the horizontal extension of a natural or artificial heap of earth and the elaborate layers of stone, and grant to the Egyptians the more elaborate structures. Right, so he's going to go with them, but it says Cahokia covers 12 acres, but was only 90 feet high, and it is uncertain whether it was natural or artificial. Oh, you still debating it? No, it's artificial. It was built by people. Yes, it's a mound. It's bigger. Cholula is larger at the base than any one of the old world pyramids, larger than any of the old world pyramids. Cholula, larger, over twice as large as that of Cheops, but only slightly higher than that of Mycerinus. All right, but we got the tallest and El Mirador, La Danta Pyramid in Guatemala. That is the tallest structure in the world. All right, I'm going to show you that. It may seem strange that the mounds and earthworks of the Mississippi Valley should be compared to the pyramids of Egypt, and yet we are convinced that many of the elements of grandeur were embodied in both classes of structures. All right, I just want to show this great image here of Palenque. This drawing before it was like destroyed. I don't know how they got this drawing here, but it's in ruins today, most of it. But this temple right here with the tower and everything describes, for those in scripture, you know, a vision of Ezekiel. They saying the palace in Palenque with the tower. Page 190, they're talking about some water vases. Again, they're taken out of some tombs. It says here, he says, it is very interesting to learn that figures very much like these are among the oldest of symbolic forms known. We have taken scores of burial vases from the mounds of Illinois, almost exactly duplicating the most peculiar shapes of many from Egypt. Almost exactly duplicating the most peculiar shapes of many from Egypt. The transformation of divinity into trees was another superstition which prevailed extensively among the Aborigines of America. All right, so we're in this book. It's called Researches Concerning the Institutions and Monuments of the Ancient Inhabitants of America, with descriptions and views of some of the most striking scenes in the Cordilleras, written in French by Alexander de Humboldt, a very famous historian, archaeologist, a lot of historical societies back in his time. This book was written in 1814 by Alexander Humboldt. Page 383 of this book, and it's talking about an analogy, a similarity between some of the religious practices of the Egyptians and the so-called Mexicans. It says here, this secular festival, this apprehension of seeing the fifth sun extinguished at the epoch of the winter solstice, seems to present a new instance of analogy, instance of analogy between the Mexicans and in the inhabitants of Egypt, meaning there's other instances. There's a lot of analogies, he's saying. Achilles Tatius, in his commentary on Aratus, has preserved the following account, which Scaliger thinks is borrowed from the Octaterities of Eudoxus, when the Egyptians saw the sun descend from the crab towards Capricorn, and the days gradually diminished, they were accustomed to sorrow from the apprehension that the sun was to abandon them entirely. This epocha coincided with the festival of Isis. But when the orb began to reappear and the duration of the days grew longer, they robed themselves in white garments and crowned themselves with flowers. On reading this passage of Achilles Tatius, we think we peruse what Gomara and Torquemada relate respecting the festival of the Mexican Jubilee. In the same manner, in the work of Sextus Empiricus against the astrologers, we find as it were the description of the symbolical figure which we have engraved in plate 15 from the manuscript preserved at Velletri. They're saying they have the exact same symbolism and ritual practice, ceremonial practice here in Mexico. All right, they even have the codes in plate 15 showing it. In every nation on earth, superstitious ideas assume the same form at the rise and fall of civilization. And it is on account of this analogy that it is difficult to distinguish what has been communicated from country to country and what man has drawn from an interior source. All right, so very great point there, Alexander Humboldt. He's saying, you know, who can say what has been passed on by word or orally? Like if an Egyptian came over here and taught them this, or the Mexicans went over there and taught them that, you know, who can say if this was past or this was something that they had originally that nobody taught them? So Egyptians didn't teach the Mexicans this. This is a Mexican thing. So what is the original? What if, you know, like what we're saying over there's just a duplicate? That's why it's the same. That's why there's an analogy, because it's just a duplicate. It's a hijacked so-called Egypt over there. To throw more light on the researches which formed the object of my memoir on the Mexican calendar. All right, so he actually wrote a lot about the calendar. We have a future video on how actual far back it goes and how it matches all the old world calendars, and actually is very much older and way more sophisticated. All right, so we're just reading this little part right here about what he says about it and a point of view of another scholar that he is going to quote. Right, it says here again, I shall here insert the very judicious observations that have been communicated to me by Mr. Jomard. The name of this distinguished gentleman is well known to those who study the antiquities of Egypt, all right? I here insert an extract of a letter which he has lately addressed to me, and he says, I have also recognized in your memoir on the division of time among the Mexican nations, compared with those of Asia, some very striking analogies between the Toltec calendar and institutions observed on the banks of the Nile, all right? Another similarity. Among these analogies, there is one which is worthy of attention. It is the use of the vague year of 365 days, composed of equal months, and of 5 complementary days, equally employed at Thebes and Mexico. Thebes and Mexico, same. A distance of 3,000 leagues. All right, that's how far apart they are, yet they have the same exact calendar, right? As to the Mexicans, it would be superfluous to examine how they attained this knowledge. Such a problem would not be soon resolved. How do the Mexicans know about this 365 days? Because we are talking about ancient Egypt. They are Tameri. We're not talking about in generalized. We're just talking about this is the land that would have been called ancient Egypt back in those times, right? Not generalizing, not leaving out any other nations that were here too, right? Such a problem would not be soon resolved. They don't know how, why it's the same. But the fact of the intercalation of 13 days every cycle, that is the use of a year of 365 days and 1/4 is proof that it was either borrowed from the Egyptians. It had to, I mean, they can't explain it. They're like, how do they had to have borrowed it from the Egyptians, or that they had a common origin. See what he's saying? This is a very scholarly person he's quoting. All right, another scholar's quoting another scholar. This book's from 1814. He's letting you know They had to have either been borrowed by the Egyptians or that they had a common origin. They are these so-called ancient Egyptians, Tameri. You have pointed out a fact of more importance in as much as it pertains to the manners of nations, which is the festival of the winter solstice, celebrated equally by the Egyptians and the Aztecs. Same. The former, if we may believe Achilles put on mourning on seeing the sun descending toward Capricorn in the decrease of the day, but when the sun returned toward the crab, they clothe themselves in white and decorate themselves with crowns. The custom of the Mexicans, as you have described it, just like the Mexicans, they actually did that. It is no doubt analogous with the Egyptian festival. Same thing. We're talking about the real ancient Tameri. And now we're in the book. It's called Before Columbus. Links Between the Old World and Ancient America by Cyrus H. Gordon. There is an Egyptian novelette that bears on the problem of the talking bearded serpent. In ancient Mexico, Quetzalcoatl is identified with the ruler. In fact, Moctezuma still wore the feathered crown of Quetzalcoatl and was regarded as the plumed serpent incarnate when Cortez came. This sort of imagery is not uncommon. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the falcon god, all right, a bird with feathers, right? Horus incarnate. Any Egyptian seeing the falcon in art knew when it represented the pharaoh. And in Egyptian literature, the pharaoh could be referred to as the falcon. Our Egyptian novelette called The Shipwrecked Sailor deals with a far-off, wondrous island whose ruler was a bearded, talking serpent. Even as Quetzalcoatl, the human ruler, was at the same time a bearded, talking serpent, the text composed in the Middle Egyptian language was probably written during the 12th dynasty, during the first quarter of the second millennium BC. Probably. You don't know. That's what the date they give us. But he's letting us know that there's an actual Egyptian writing from that time, the 12th dynasty, talking about an wondrous island far distant with a feathered serpent, a bearded feathered serpent talking. All right, a dracan with beard. All right. Continuing in the book, it says, in this chapter, we have endeavored to trace the plumed serpent back to old world antiquity. The plumed serpent, really? The serpent king is very ancient in Egypt. In fact, a pharaoh of the first dynasty, early in the 3rd millennium BC, whose name is indicated by a snake glyph, used to be called the serpent king. Later, Egyptologists pronounced his name Jet. Now they prefer to call him Wahi. In the Shipwrecked Sailor, the serpent king is bearded, as in the Mesoamerican tradition. On the Athenian Acropolis, we find the mythological deified serpents, not only bearded, but actually plumed as well, combining the human and serpentine forms like Quetzalcoatl, who was envisaged as a bearded, deified Caucasian, Dash the hijack, and simultaneously as bearded, plumed serpent. Now I just want to show this statue pottery sculpture right here. I'm going to show you where it's from. Now you guys can see what he has. Looks like a turban, or looks even the things they wore in Egypt. You see his eyes are kind of Asiatic, little slanted upwards, but doesn't mean anything, right? We don't know his complexion. We don't know what he really looked like or what is being represented here. But look at the glyphs. All right. Does that look Egyptian to you? The guy sitting down. All right, and it says here, sitting figure from Monte Alban, Mexico. From Mexico. The pose recalls the common Egyptian posture, characteristic of scribes. He was a scribe, a real ancient Tamerian scribe. He was a real scribe. Moreover, the tiara and emblems remind one of Egyptian headdresses, all right? The headdress, look at that. And it's a headdress and hieroglyphics. Yet the validity of such resemblances depends on the identity and detail, which requires further investigation. They don't know. All right, look at that. Continue on page 135. It says here, the ancients often transported live animals and plants from place to place by ship. Perhaps the best known example is Solomon's importation of monkeys and peacocks through his ocean-going fleet. Whether the geographical spread of the crocodile is due to human activity is to be determined by zoologists. But the fact is that not only the animal, but also its name is distributed over the old and new world. Listen to this. It says, in Egypt, the crocodile was called Sabek, right? SBK, usually pronounced Sobek, and was worshipped in Fayum, which was the crocodile nome or district. Now, the Aztec name for the crocodile is Cipactli, whose stem is Sipak, pronounced Sipak, right? So Sipak, Sopek, Sipak, Sopek, Sobek, Sipak. Plus, the nominal suffix tli was, as far as consonants go, there is no discrepancy between Egyptian SBK or Sobek and Nahuatl Sopek, because the latter B and P are not distinguishable. It's the exact same name. The Egyptians and the Aztecs used the exact same. All right, they had the exact same meaning and prefix etymology for this crocodile, for the crocodile. You hear that? The fact that the animal and its name are the same in Egypt and in Middle America is striking enough, but we can go further. In both places, the crocodile was worshipped both in its complete animal form or with certain human attributes. In the Mayan city of Tikal, a bone of the late classical period, AD 700, bears a carving that portrays a boat manned by three Mayans, one in the center, another at the prow, and the third at the stern. They are transporting four-seated animal deities. The last is a crocodile like an iguana. The carved scene is interesting in several ways, for it not only illustrates the worship of an assortment of zoomorphic gods, so typical of Egypt, but it also shows that sacred barks for the ceremonial transportation of gods were known in Middle America as well as on the Nile. All right, same. All right, where is ancient Tameri? Where is the true old world? Where is the true so-called ancient Egypt? Over here in this part of the world. We're in this book real quick. It's called Evidences of Ancient Civilization in America. Lecture delivered on behalf of the Mechanics Institute, Tuesday, 1st March, 1870 by W.E. Bessie, M.D. All right, 1870. The antiquities of Mexico and Central America reveal religious symbols, devices, and ideas nearly identical with those found in all countries of the Old World. Identical. So which one is the true Old World? Identical. Where Kushite communities formerly existed, they exhibit evidences of planet worship with its usual Orphic and phallic accompaniments. Humboldt visited America, observed these remains of civilization, and was convinced that communication with the Old World formerly existed. The Dominic also traversed the desert wilds of America and Mexico and produced 2 volumes as the result of his discoveries, abounding with evidences of an extinct civilization. Now down here it says the high state of agriculture, mechanical art, commerce, the profusion of gold and copper, and the religious views and domestic manners which were found to exist among the long since extinct Aztec and Tezcucan peoples, found in possession of the eastern shores of Mexico by the rapacious Spaniards, are suggestive of a long period of peaceful possession and prosperity in that country, during which time they had succeeded in surrounding themselves with every conceivable kind of luxury, and there are traces of a superior civilization even beyond the Aztecs, a superior civilization. They possessed a system of numerals and divided their years into 18 months and 20 days each, 5 complementary days, as in Egypt, just like in Egypt, being added to make up the full number of 365 days. They were also devoted astrologers, and their knowledge of astronomy is truly astonishing. They used the sundial to mark the day, which was divided into 16 parts, commencing at sunrise. An immense circular block of carved stones, centered in 1790 in the Great Square of Mexico, has supplied the means of establishing some interesting facts in regard to Mexican science. This colossal fragment on which the calendar is engraved shows that they had the means of settling the hours of the day with precision.
Praise 50,000.